In this video, we will begin setting up the game loop, starting with the Game Manager game object and script. Back in our level 1 scene, we still don't have that much for the player to do. We've defined a sort of play space for the player to move around in, and we've created one enemy for the player to interact with. But there's still a lot of typical elements you'd see in a game we have yet to put in ours. These elements include menus, an actual gameplay loop that distinguishes the start and end of gameplay. For us to be able to win our game, we need to include a prefab we've already created for you called the Game Manager. This is located under Prefabs, Management, Game Manager. So let's drag that into our scene. The Game Manager prefab only has one important component, which is the Game Manager script, and the important job of that script is to keep track of game state information, such as whether the player has won or lost. The Game Manager also handles responding to the player losing or winning the game. One of the things I want to point out about the Game Manager we provide for this project is that it is made specifically for this game. That means if you wanted to use this Game Manager for another project, you really couldn't. Whereas many of the other scripts we provide can easily be reused with little or no modification. At some point, we will discuss ad hoc code as well as generalization in code, but I wanted to point out that these more managerial scripts we provide won't translate well if you wanted to reuse them in other projects. The next thing I want to point out about the Game Manager is that it looks different from the other scripts. It has a little gear as its icon. It's not particularly important that it's different, it's just something Unity does when you create a script called Game Manager to highlight its role. The last thing I want to draw attention to are the settings for the Game Manager. You'll notice that the Game Manager wants a reference to a UI manager and a reference for the player. The Game Manager keeps track of the current score and the high score, which it also stores between playthroughs. And then the Game Manager has settings for winning and losing the game, which we will go into detail as we set all this up. The first thing we need to set up is the UI Manager, which you might have noticed is another prefab under that management folder. Let's drag that in right now. Now that we have our UI Manager, let's go back to our Game Manager and give it the references it asks for. So we drag the UI Manager into its slot and the player into the player spot. Now that gives our Game Manager the references it needs to run. But if we hit play right now, we should see a couple of warning messages. Both of these messages are generated by the scripts we provided and meant to help us figure out how things should be set up. So if we read the first one, it says there is no event system in the scene, and the UI in Unity requires an event system to run. And then the warning tells us how to add one. Except we aren't going to add one that way. We're actually going to add one the way most get added, in the way that causes most people to end up not realizing event systems are even a thing because they can go unnoticed. What we are going to do is create a canvas by right-clicking in our scene hierarchy and then selecting UI, Canvas. And doing this actually creates two things for us. It creates the canvas we asked for, but it also creates the event system, because Unity's UI navigation uses the event system. So whenever a canvas is created and no event system exists, Unity will create one. Before we start fiddling with the canvas to get our UI set up, we need to edit the event system game object. Because we are using the input system, we need to replace the standalone input module with the input system UI input module, which fortunately we can do by just clicking this replace button. Now our UI will respond to input, but only the default input, which should be fine, but just in case, we do have a set of inputs created for UI that we're going to replace in the event system, so let's do that. Keep the event system open in the inspector window and navigate to Prefabs, Input, and then drag the UI input actions into the actions asset setting on the input system UI input module. Now our event system should be set up correctly, so let's take a look at our canvas again. So a canvas in its default settings is basically an overlay to put user interface elements on, such as text, images, and buttons, and that's exactly what we are going to use it for. Probably the most important thing about a canvas is the canvas scaler component. This controls how the canvas scales across different screen sizes or displays, and its default setting is constant pixel size, which means that UI in the canvas will always take up the same pixel size which can be problematic when going between resolutions, which we are going to see in a second. So let's leave the settings alone for now and start adding the UI we want to the canvas, and then we'll come back and see why the UI scale mode matters. First, let's right-click our canvas game object and select UI Text. So what this has done is create a new text on the canvas that we can barely read in our game view, because the default color is gray, and I also can't see it in our scene view because I'm not looking at the full canvas. I'm only looking at this bottom corner of it. You can see it outlined by this white line here. If I mouse over my scene view and hit the F key while I have the canvas selected though, the view will zoom out to show me the entire canvas. Now I can see the text and even click on it in the scene view to select it again. One of the things we want for our game is score and high score to be displayed. So let's start with those. So we're going to go ahead and rename this text score text to make it a little more descriptive. And then we're going to actually take a look at the text component in the inspector. The text component controls what this text looks like and how it's displayed. So we can change things like the text, the font style, size, spacing, and so on. We're going to change the text to be score, space, 0. We're going to change the font to one we've included in this package by clicking this little circle and selecting Mana SPC. And then we are going to change the color to white to make the text stand out on our dark background. Now let's move it away from the middle of our screen and put it on the top left instead. Now we can highlight a problem with just dragging this UI element up to the top left corner and calling that good. You'll notice if we go to our game view and we change our aspect ratio from this dropdown, all of a sudden the score isn't in the top left corner anymore. This is because of anchors and pivots in Unity's UI. The anchors are these little white triangles you can see in the middle of the canvas. Every UI element you create will have these for themselves, and they act as positional controls for the UI element they are a part of in relation to the parent object. If that's a little bit confusing, don't worry, I also get confused by it. But basically what happens is the UI element moves based on the anchor's locations. So if we want the UI to be in the top left, we can actually set the anchors to be in the top left. We can do this manually by dragging them, but we won't because doing it manually is time consuming. Instead, we have this icon in the inspector that represents the pivot and anchoring settings of the UI. If we click on this, we can see that we can control the position of the UI element, its anchors, and the pivot, and can select from several presets. So we want to hold Shift to change the pivot, and Alt to change the position, and select the top left preset. And now, regardless of what aspect ratio we switch to, the score will stay anchored to the top left of our screen. Now that we have that created, let's add a text for a high score by duplicating our score text. And renaming it high score text, and because this is already anchored to the top left, we can just drag this to be below the score text in our scene. And let's change the text display. We know this is for the high score, so let's change this to high score, 0. So that's a good outline for how we want our in-game UI to look.